From the 11 Alive studios, this is The Georgia Vote with Faith Jesse and Zach Merchant.
Georgia lost a long-serving elected official this week. Congressman David Scott, a Democrat from the 13th District, died at the age of 80. His political career began in the 1970s in the state capitol. He ran for Congress in 2002 and won, and served in the United States House of Representatives ever since. He was running for re-election for a 13th term when he died. Scott was the first black chairman of the House Agriculture Committee. He was also the brother-in-law of baseball legend Hank Aaron. On Wednesday, fellow Democratic Congressman Sanford Bishop, who represents Georgia's 2nd District, led a remembrance of Scott on the House floor.
He understood that the health of our farms, the dignity of our workers, and the nourishment of our people are bound together, and he labored each day to translate that understanding into results.
And Governor Brian Kemp held a press conference Wednesday at the state capitol. It was an event dedicated to early education in the state, but he began with these words about Congressman Scott.
Congressman Scott has served our state for many years. He was a champion for so many communities, especially our agriculture industry, and his impact will be felt for years, and our prayers are with him and his loved ones at this time.
Democratic U.S. Senator Raphael Warnock said in part, quote, David Scott was Georgians' Georgian. For decades, Congressman Scott was the embodiment of public service in our state. Throughout his years in the Georgia General Assembly and later in the U.S. Congress, he made uplifting and supporting the people of Georgia his top priority. And this from Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens. For decades, he fought for Georgia farmers, advocated for veterans, and ensured his constituents were supported at the street level with job and health fairs, serving tens of thousands of Georgians over the years. His legacy is one of service, perseverance, and deep commitment to this state. The death of Congressman Scott leaves a vacancy in Georgia's 13th Congressional District. Scott was the only congressman the 13th District had ever known. Population growth led to the addition of the district after the 2000 census, and Congressman Scott won the first election there in 2002. The district includes parts of Clayton, Henry, Rockdale, Newton, DeKalb, and Gwinnett counties. So here's what comes next for those voters there. David Scott's current term in Congress, it runs through early January. Governor Brian Kemp will call a special election to fill the remainder of his term. There's also the matter of Georgia's primary election coming up in just a few weeks on May 19th. This election will decide who faces off in November for a full 2-year term beginning in 2027, and it is very likely the special election to fill the rest of the current term happens after the primary election for the next term. In all, 6 Democrats and 1 Republican have all qualified to be on that primary ballot. A runoff is likely in the Democratic field, which could take place and would take place on June 16th. Again, that would be for a full 2-year term beginning in January of 2027. There's no date yet set for the special election to fill the final 8 months of Congressman Scott's term. That decision is up to Governor Brian Kemp, and we will be watching closely for when that decision comes. Those who are hoping to become Georgia's next governor are very busy on the campaign trail right now. This past Tuesday, the Georgia Association of Manufacturers hosted a forum with most of the candidates for governor, both Republicans and Democrats. The candidates will also debate Monday as part of the Atlanta Press Club's Loudermilk Young Debate Series. The Democrats will be on stage for an hour Monday afternoon, followed by the Republicans for an hour as well. GPB will air the debates online. And the Republican candidates for U.S. Senate, they are also on the campaign trail. Derek Dooley, joined by Governor Brian Kemp, made several stops across North Georgia on Monday. It was the third leg of the Dooley-Kemp tour across the state. Dooley is one of 3 prominent Republicans, including current U.S. Congressmen Buddy Carter and Mike Collins, hoping to win the Republican primary and challenge Democratic incumbent Senator John Ossoff in November. Well, it is time now to bring in our political roundtable. Joining us today, we have Republican strategist Deanna Harris. She serves as managing partner at Midnight Rider Consulting and is the former Republican nominee for Georgia House District 41. And joining us today, Maria Andrade, Democratic strategist and co-founder of First Edition Strategies. She's a veteran political advisor with experience in advertising and nonprofits. Deanna, let's start with you. It is crunch time. It is primary crunch time right now. We're less than 4 weeks out. When you look at the governor's race and the Senate race, What are going to be the defining themes for the candidates who break out in these last few weeks?
That's really interesting because it's been very tough, and it seems like the governor's race has just been between two people.
In a crowded field, though, too, right?
Very crowded. Myself, I've only seen a few commercials on the TV and received a few mailers. I'm considered a super voter. So that's something that I think most of those folks will have to do is really reach out and get that demographic of those super voters who they know for sure will go to the ballot on that primary election date. And early voting starts Monday.
I mean, we're in it right now.
Yeah.
It is on. Maria, from a Democrat's perspective, what is standing out to you right now? It feels like if you're watching TV, you're seeing a lot of commercials. Most of them seem to be coming from the Republican side of the gubernatorial battle, but there's a very crowded field on the Democratic side as well in the governor's race.
Yeah, there absolutely is. That said, though, if you're looking at what the spending, where things are being spent, they're being spent primarily on the Republican side, but to attack each other. So in a lot of ways, Republicans are doing the work for Democrats. And I think at the end of the day, Democrats are going to come together and are going to have a straight path forward with a very bruised Republican candidate on that side.
The Democrat who does get the nomination is going to have to emerge from a crowded field as well on the Democratic side. There's 5, 6 candidates running for governor on the Democratic side. Only 2 can make it into a runoff if it does indeed go to a runoff. What are the candidates who are maybe vying for that number 2 spot in sort of a crowded 2, 3, 4 pack there need to do to emerge? What do they have to do to get voters engaged right now?
Well, I think a theme that we've seen over and over again is that theme of affordability. But I think even deeper than that is being genuine, ensuring that you're relatable to voters and making sure that your personality breaks through, as opposed to giving kind of cookie cutter answers that you think are going to potentially play well in a general. This is a time to actually present yourself to voters and be as genuine as you can be.
Deanna, how tough is it for a candidate when you're advising a candidate, you're talking to somebody who's running, or in your experience running yourself, how tough is it to be sort of quote unquote genuine with a voter, knowing maybe that in the eyes of different voters, being genuine and being authentic might look and feel different? How do you connect with everybody?
Well, statewide is very different, as you said, and it's very tough because you're going to different parts of Georgia, which are all like, you know,
different
night
places,
and day.
different geographies, different issues, right?
Yeah, very much so. So I think the most important part is to kind of capture the moment and one-on-one conversations with individuals, which really help. I know something that previously even Governor Kemp has done. He's had advocates and people who are in those different sections of the state where they can be able to speak on his behalf and give that same messaging that he would if he was there. That way it's continuous and the people hear the same words and they're always at a different event because it's 1,000,001, you know, like county events or whatever going on. So
just
you can't
look
be
at the
everywhere.
schedule, the calendar for these candidates on the weekend. It is jam-packed.
Yeah.
Maria, I see you nodding your head along too. Even in this era with millions and millions of dollars being spent on TV ads and online ads, glossy mailers, that one-on-one connection, whether with the candidate or with a surrogate, that still makes a difference.
I think it does make a difference. And don't get me wrong, I think it is very important to spend money wisely in these mass communications because I think that's going to be a very effective way to communicate, again, in mass with a lot of people. That said, that one-on-one and what Deanna was saying, I think having those endorsers be able to be surrogates for you and explain your message, have those one-on-one conversations is going to really, really make the difference.
Let's turn our eyes now to somebody who had decades of those one-on-one conversations with Georgians, and that is Congressman David Scott, who died this week at the age of 80, serving 50 years in elected office in Georgia, both at the state capitol and then in the United States capitol. Deanna, what will voters and Georgians remember about Congressman Scott?
I mean, Congressman Scott was a titan for Georgia, and he really looked out for our agriculture community, which is really important, and veterans. And one thing I could say, he knew how to get some appropriations money back to this state, and that's very remarkable, and I appreciate him for the things that he did. I have a short story to tell. Former Senator Jeff Mullis told me about his first year in getting elected to the Senate, which was David Scott's last year from there. And he was the rules chairman. He gave a $100 donation to his congressional campaign, and he was set that whole entire session. So just to know that Congressman Scott knew how to work with bipartisan everyone, and he didn't, you know, it didn't matter what side of the aisle you were on. He would work with you if you presented good bills. So.
And that's what people say, and so many of these remembrances point to his longevity in office and his willingness to buck his party sometimes and vote his conscience, vote his state, and agree and work with others across the aisle. Maria, for Georgia Democrats, this is somebody who was a stalwart in your party for decades. What will Georgia Democrats in particular view as Congressman Scott's legacy?
I think his legacy of service is one to be remembered. I mean, he was deeply known in the community for hosting health fairs and job fairs as well. Things that were so critical, because not only did he understand that he needed to go and do all of the legislative work, but he also understood that you needed to be on the ground and working with people, like we were saying, one-on-one.
And we've got about 30 seconds left, but I'd be remiss if we didn't ask this, Deanna, to close it out. When you talk about 50 years in service in the state of Georgia, just share a little bit about how much change the congressman saw in our state, in our politics, in our country.
I mean, gosh, 2002 is when he first started in Congress, and he was served at the state level prior to that. So being elected in the 70s to, 2026 and seeing how much we've evolved, even with technology, social media, TV, and even looking at how funding for campaigns has changed, right? I couldn't imagine they were spending millions back in the 70s, how we are now. So I could imagine that's been something he can share a lot of information with. I hope he kept a journal of it.
So much change that voters got to see along the way, but if you are in elected office, you're seeing it right in the eye of the hurricane sometimes, and he saw all of it for 50 years. Yes, thank you very much. We'll be right back with much more after this. Well, both Republicans and Democrats, they say they are confident about their prospects in the upcoming midterm elections. Nationally, Democrats hope to win the U.S. House of Representatives, but Republicans are fighting hard to keep control of it. Right here in Georgia, Democrats hope to win the governor's mansion for the first time since Roy Barnes left office in 2003. This week, our Faith Jesse asked the chair of the state Democratic Party, Charlie Bailey, how they can accomplish that goal.
What is the messaging from Democrats outside of Atlanta? And I mean, it's not just the governor's race, it's Senator Ossoff, it's the down ballot races as well, to show, in your words, to prove to Georgians that Democrats are right here, Republicans are wrong. How do you get people to believe that in a state, like you said, that has chosen Republican leadership for the last 22 years?
Well, I'm from rural Georgia, so this ain't academic for me, and I don't have to, go to some pollster or consultant to ask, because my family, I'm an 8th generation Georgian. I'm a 7th generation Harris County, and that's rural West Georgia. I grew up on a cattle farm. I understand how important rural Georgia is to this ain't the state of Atlanta, it is the state of Georgia. And for instance, when Joe Biden won in 2020, there were a lot of places where he made gains. One of those was rural Georgia. If you add up all the rural places, all the rural counties in this state, improved on that margin by like 2%. And you can say, well, that's just 2%. Well, it's the difference of winning and losing in a state like this. And so the message, though, I think sometimes people get this a little confused. They think there's different messages for different parts of the state, and there's not. Everybody in this state, whether it's, frankly, a lot of the people living in rural Georgia have been hit even harder by Republican policies. It's been rural hospitals that have been hit the most by the decisions that people like Burt Jones and others have made in their time in public life to not expand Medicaid and to cut health care. We've had 9 rural hospitals closed in the last 15 years. So it's not a different message outside of Atlanta. It's the same message. And the message is Republicans have betrayed you. They've sold you a bill of goods, but with the great power they have been given, they have rewarded billionaires, big corporations, and whoever the latest lobbyist was to buy a mistake and a bourbon. That's the facts. And those are the facts that the people of Georgia know in their gut, and that's what we are going to argue to them throughout this year.
And that is just a part of that conversation. You can see Faith's entire interview with the chair of the state Democratic Party, Charlie Bailey. It is streaming right now on 11 Alive Plus. Well, we don't need to tell you, you know this, you watch every week. It is a very busy election season, and we are at this point in the busiest 3-week, 4-week, how many weeks now? Almost days-long stretch heading into the primary election on May 19th. One of the last big hurdles for these candidates, particularly, let's talk about the governor's race some more here, is an upcoming debate early next week on Georgia Public Broadcasting as part of the Atlanta Press Club's Loudermilk Young Debate Series. Deanna, let's start with you. The Republicans and the Democrats are going to be up debating there. For the Republican gubernatorial candidates, what do they need to do to come out of that debate and feel like it was a success for their campaign?
I think it's more about talking to the issues and speaking to the things that the voters really care about versus going on the back and forth of attacking each other. That's going to be really important. And I can see someone who is an outsider and maybe have no political experience and know how the legislature processes things and what the governor actually does on a day-to-day basis. They could fall into the trap of, just kind of attacking their opponents and saying what they don't do and what's good about them. Because even the commercials are like that, right? Like saying, oh, I'm going to stop your property taxes today. And it's like, okay, maybe not. But that'll be really important, is to really speak to issues and how they can actually impact our state.
And Maria, you're obviously a Democrat, and I'm going to ask for a Democratic perspective in a moment. But sometimes I think it's instructive to ask you to kind of take the party hat off for a moment and be a strategist. If you were advising a candidate on the Republican side of the gubernatorial debate, it seemed to be a dynamic where Rick Jackson and Burt Jones are taking a lot of the attention in this race right now, but you've also got Attorney General Chris Carr, Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, who are major statewide contenders that now seem to be trying to get a little more attention right now. What would you advise them to do on that debate stage to take a little bit of the spotlight?
I think if I were them, I would take a moment to obviously talk about your platform and kind of like present all the ideas about what makes you you. But I would prepare a very beautiful attack to both of those candidates in one about how out of touch these two millionaires are. In a moment in history, and the history of Georgia specifically, where people are having to choose between food on their table or paying their medical bills. And I think by wrapping that attack beautifully and presenting yourself and your platform, I think that might stand out.
What are Democrats going to be looking for to happen on the Republican debate stage? And then, Deanna, I want to ask you what Republicans are going to be asking for from the Democrats in the debate stage. Maria, you go first.
So, we have seen, and people of Georgia have seen, Burt Jones and Mr. Action Jackson over here attack each other in everybody's living room, right? So we have seen all the attacks, but this is going to be the only time that Rick Jackson has said that he will debate Burt Jones and the rest of the Republican gubernatorial candidates. So I will be very, very interested as to how those attacks will play live as they're responding to each other. Will they be cordial to each other, or are they going to just go for, really go for the jugular there?
And there is always a different dynamic when it's in the room, physically in the same space as the person you are talking to and maybe lobbing some attacks at. Deanna, the same question to you. What are Republicans watching for from the Democrats who are going to be on this debate stage? We saw many of the top contenders debate here at 11 Alive a few weeks ago. This will be the second really big debate opportunity for the Democratic gubernatorial field.
Well, again, like you said, they were here not too long ago, and I think that a lot of our candidates pulled some information, and then they've really been kind of doing a few attacks here and there on some of the top contenders on the Democrat side based on the things that they said.
What stood out in particular, you think?
Well, I mean, the spotlight's been on Keisha Lance Bottoms, of course, because their polls are saying that she's number one. And so with that, I've seen Rick Jackson speak about Keisha and the things that she's done and how she hasn't protected Atlanta. They've always talked about her past and how things didn't really go very well with the police force of APD in Fulton County. And so I think those are some public safety is some of the things that they probably will look at and make that like a number one issue, especially when it comes to her and her previous tenure as serving as mayor.
How do you think Democrats will advise her to talk about her tenure as the mayor of Atlanta, which was during a time of a lot going on in our city?
I think that's correct, and I think it is very important for her to put it in the context of which not only the city of Atlanta, but Georgia and the entire country was going under. Also putting it in context as to how the federal government was handling everything at the time as well, and then immediately pivot back to the day-to-day issues and what she is going to do moving forward, what her values are, and how she is going to make life better for Georgians moving forward.
We are going to see how all this plays out. Ultimately, as always, the Georgia voter gets the final say. Stay with us. Much more coming up after the break. This week, state and city of Atlanta leaders made their case to host the 2028 Democratic National Convention, and that pitch comes after falling just short 4 years ago. They say downtown itself has changed for the better since Atlanta was unable to secure that 2024 Democratic National Convention. Doug Richards with the 11 Alive Politics team reports.
Downtown Atlanta is rapidly changing, and many of the new hotels and other facilities under construction surround State Farm Arena, a potential venue for the 2028 Democratic Convention.
They came here 4 years ago, and the building that we're standing in right now did not exist.
Mayor Andre Dickens spent much of the last 2 days with Ken Martin, the current National Democratic Party chairman. Aside from Atlanta, the Democratic National Committee is also considering bids from Boston, Denver, Philadelphia, and Chicago.
And all these are great cities, right? But they ain't Atlanta, and they're not Georgia.
Martin is considering Atlanta's convention hosting capabilities for some 35,000 guests, as well as its civil rights history and Georgia's status as a political swing state. National Democrats would like to nudge Georgia away from Republicans in the 2028 election and think a national convention could energize Georgia voters. Though at this event, Martin was very non-committal.
We also seek a city that shares our values and will be a true partner with us as we plan this once-in-a-lifetime event.
Atlanta last hosted the DNC back in 1988 when the Democrats nominated Michael Dukakis for president. Up next, a special tribute to David Scott from Georgia's congressional delegation. David Scott spent 5 decades in elected office. On Wednesday, some of the lawmakers who knew him best gathered on the U.S. House floor to honor his legacy and his faith.
In his briefcase, no telling how long he'd been carrying that briefcase, at the top of that briefcase always was his Bible. And I remember sitting, and he was in 10D and I was in 10E, and as soon as you sit down, you have a little conversation, and when the plane's about ready to take off, he would open that Bible and start reading it. And I can tell you, he read it day in and day out on that airplane. And I remember literally picking up some of the pages one day when they fell out, and how I wish we all had that devotion. A wonderful man. He will be missed by many, including me and my family, and I'd like to yield now back to my friend and colleague, Congressman Sanford Bishop.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask my colleagues in the House to please rise for a moment of silence in memory of our colleague, David Scott.
The Chair asks all those present in the chamber, as well as members and staff throughout the Capitol, to please rise for a moment of silence in remembrance of the late Honorable David Scott of Georgia.
Representative David Scott was 80 years old. We'll see you next week.